Hey folks, this is Jason Lewis, the producer of the From the Shadows podcast. I just want to remind you about our website, fromtheshadowspodcast.com. We have a Facebook page. We would appreciate it if you like and follow. Also, join our discussion group on Facebook called After the Shadows. We have a Twitter feed. Please follow us on Twitter. It can be found with @podcast_from. Follow us on Instagram at From the Shadows Podcast. We have a YouTube channel. Go to the search bar at YouTube and put From the Shadows Podcast, and please subscribe to that channel. We are also on the Odyssey Radio Network, and we can be found there at odyssey1.com. We're still on the traditional podcatchers that everybody loves to listen to us on. We get a lot of feedback, so please rate the podcast and communicate with whether you're on Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, or Google Podcasts. We're there, and we appreciate it when you leave comments for us. Well, that's all I have for you right now, folks, and thanks for being a part of the From the Shadows podcast family. So with that being said, let's get this episode started. Now I'm going to turn you over to your host, Shane Grove.
Welcome to the From the Shadows podcast. I'm your host, Shane Grove, and joining me this morning is the Judge. What's happening, Judge?
Good morning.
I should say somewhat famous Judge, because for anybody who wasn't aware, doesn't follow us on social media, shame on you, but the Judge appeared on this last week's episode of Sasquatch Chronicles with Wes, telling his famous Dogman story.
That is correct.
That's correct. All right. It was an excellent episode. So if you are listening to this episode and haven't checked that out, go check out last week's, or by the time this comes out, it'll be last week's Sasquatch Chronicles, and listen to the Judge tell a really fascinating story that.
Well, and Wes has some really good insight too.
Yes.
So it's fascinating for me to talk to him.
And Jason, our super producer's here this morning. How's it going, Jason?
Very good, thank you, Shane. Greetings, everybody.
Now, I do feel kind of bad about saying that Wes had a lot of good insight about your Dogman story, considering our guest on this podcast is the godmother of Dogman, not literally, but metaphorically. Because that would be kind of weird if she was the godmother of Dogman.
This would be true.
That would answer a lot of questions, about what Dogman really is. But world-renowned, best-selling author, Dogman expert, Linda Godfrey is joining us today. How you doing, Linda?
I'm great, thanks. I'm really glad to be here with you guys. Not there literally, but on air.
Well, we were a little bit weirded out this morning here in North Central Ohio, where we're at. We woke up and the fog was like enveloped everything out in the country. And I woke up and I'm just kind of like, is this a Dogman conspiracy? That Dogman's gonna try to keep us from talking to Linda and expose the truth to what Dogman really is
it's a bad omen
to all of our listeners. I had one of our loyal listeners and our longtime sponsor, Todd Redmond. We went out for his morning jog, and he knew we were talking to you this morning, and he's like, if I don't, he sent me a picture from the road, the country road he's jogging. He goes, if I don't come back, make me a story on your podcast. So we may have to amend this podcast if Todd does not check in.
If he disappears.
If he doesn't check in. So Linda, we're super excited to have you on. And for all of our listeners who do not know who you are and what it is that you do, you want to give everybody a little background on how you got thrust into
the world's foremost expert on Dogman.
Yes, and we could certainly say that without a shadow of a doubt. And if anybody challenges, we'll meet you out back and wrestle you, because we won't believe it.
We won't believe them.
No. So it's all yours, Linda. What can you tell our listeners?
Well, believe it or not, it's been almost 30 years since I started working for the county newspaper called The Week in southeastern Wisconsin. And people started telling me that they were seeing something that looked like a wolf or a German shepherd walking upright on this country road it runs about 3-4 miles long, just outside of Elkhorn, Wisconsin. And they were saying, I know there's no such things as werewolves, but if there were, this would be it. Because they would describe something 5 to 7 feet tall, with a head like a wolf or German shepherd, long muzzle and fangs, and the thing was, it would be running or walking on its hind legs, which is something that canines just don't do in the wild. You can find lots of them on the internet, dancing for cookies or something like that. But
I mean, I'll dance around for cookies. Come on.
There you go. Yeah, a lot of people would. It depends on the kind of cookie, but a lot of people would. And this is a different sort of thing. It does happen in the wild. I know there was a really popular video that showed a bear walking and running on his hind legs because he had injured paws. And in nature, animals, they'll try and stay alive as long as they can, and if they can't run on all fours, they'll run on 2 legs. And people have often trained larger mammals to do things, but this wasn't anything like a single bear sighting or whatever. I knew of at least 15 people by the time I finished investigating, and I knew there were more that I hadn't talked to, that over just the past several years, and this would have been 1991 into winter of 1992, that were insisting they'd seen it. And some of the sightings were already 3, 4, 5 years old, so it had been going on a while. And I happened to be talking to our county's animal control officer, and I asked him if he had heard anything about these rumors. And he gave me kind of a look, and he opened his files drawer and pulled out a file that was marked werewolves.
Oh, jeez.
So that, I'm sure my eyes were kind of bulging open like, the old Warner Brothers cartoons. When they see something, the eyes would go boing.
I can hear Shaggy right now. Zoinks!
Well, at least he didn't throw out a file that said Dracula and then said, "Oh, wait a second, that's the wrong one. Here's the werewolf."
Yeah. Well, there actually was a sort of a paranormal component to it. I'll get to in just a second. But what happened was he lent me the contact information. People had actually been contacting him and telling him, and it made sense, if you see something big and sort of dangerous looking, you call your officials. And he really didn't know what any of them were talking about. Nobody had informed him before the witnesses started calling. And I went out and began interviewing them myself and was very impressed with their integrity. It was a very diverse group of people. We had everything from an African-American woman who was still in high school to a middle-aged lady who was running late night to her job, and so she was always out at night. We had a man who was an official, a highly placed official at a Milwaukee airport. There's only one big airport in Milwaukee, so you can probably all guess which one it is. There were farmers. There were, older, elderly people. You just name it. There was a different type there. So I thought, well, with this group, and most of them don't know each other. A few did, but most of them didn't know, and didn't even know that others had called the official about it. And so I interviewed them, ran a story, and then the story just ran away with me. And I never thought at that time that I would, almost 30 years later, be sitting and talking about it on the radio, or that so many people would have called me from or written me from all over the world, which is still happening too. I get news stories all the time. So it's just an unanticipated life that I've lived ever since this happened.
So our listeners,
the thing is, sure.
Just so our listeners understand. So our listeners understand, we're talking about the legendary Beast of Bray Road, which probably a lot of people have heard of, but didn't understand the background. And for our listeners here, I've actually Google Earthed Bray Road out of curiosity, and it looks like every other country road in our geographical location.
Yeah.
There's nothing spooky. It's not one of these spooky lane type of things, where the leaves are hanging low and, it's dark and shadow. It's mostly open farmland. So it's really, I was baffled for years. I finally came up with what I think might be an answer to why all these things are happening in this one little area, especially on the road. I can pinpoint certain places too, but it did have a special purpose at one time, and finding that took years of digging in the local libraries until I found a little book I hadn't seen before. And this is just my conjecture, and I think I've got this in my next to most recent book, Monsters Among Us. It's in. I keep forgetting what's in what book now.
Well, you've only written like 50 books, right? Or no, it's 18. I'm sorry. It's 18. Now, Linda, I can tell by the enthusiasm in your voice that even though this is 30 years later and it was somewhat unexpected, or probably totally unexpected, you are glad that you followed up on some of those stories and took that file and started down this path. Am I right to assume that? Because even this early in the morning, you seem pretty excited about the prospect of a half man, half wolf running around anywhere.
Well, it's just that I still get amazed and curious as to what it was exactly and why people are still seeing it and why is it all over the world, really. And when you get looking into other phenomena, and here's the thing, I found that like the late great John Keel, the investigator who pretty much gave us Mothman, you start to realize that all of these things seem related somehow, geographically, or in legend and stories about them. And that's kind of what keeps me going. That and the fact that people keep seeing it. It wasn't like, 2 or 3 people saw this weird animal, and really in a lot of places that's all it takes to start a legend is, a few sightings with one animal. This one just kept going and going and is still going. And I really didn't dive into it immediately either because I worked for that newspaper for 10 years, and during those 10 years I maybe wrote 3 update ones when I had gotten a particularly impressive little bunch of sightings. I would do a column for the paper. The rest of the time I was just doing ordinary newspaper fare and some heavy subjects. It wasn't just like a little village shopper. We had stories on spousal abuse and festivals in the area, you name it, the whole thing that you usually see in a small weekly newspaper. I think the circulation was something like 15,000, though. It's not really just a tiny newspaper. And so after 10 years, and it kept increasing and increasing, and the TV shows had been coming out. We had Inside Edition back when Bill O'Reilly was the host of that, and the new sci-fi show had come out, and those were pretty big things at that time. You have to remember back in 1991 when this happened too, there was no internet as we know it. There was nothing to, there was no Google lookup or anything else. So these programs were very important to people as pretty much their only way to learn information about the creature. And so finally, after about 10 years, I thought, well, I really ought to write a book about it. And I was pretty sure that no respectable publisher would take it. So I wrote a historic crime book first, true historic crime, about a poison murderer in the same county, Walworth County, in the 1920s that had been totally forgotten, never written about since the crimes were committed, and it was called The Poison Widow. A tale of sin, strychnine, and murder. And it was a great story. And the publisher was a very good regional publisher, so I was glad to have it. And I went to see him after it was published, and he said, well, so what have you got now? And I said, well, would you believe werewolves? And they liked it. And part of it was that I wasn't just writing accounts of people seeing this. I was putting in all of the sociological things that were happening at the time. You know, the bakers were making werewolf cookies, and politicians were running the okay by the Wolfman, and they have there's one congressman who had his picture taken with a guy in a werewolf suit standing by the woods, and he won his election too. So,
well, it was a pretty good endorsement.
Yes, yeah. I mean, what are you going to do? Not vote for the guy and have? I mean, imagine that door-to-door solicitation. You know, can I count on your vote for? If not, here's my campaign chairman. He'd like to have a few words with you.
Yes.
But I see what you did, Linda. You softened them up with a real legitimate story that you're an excellent writer. So they're probably like, man, this is. And then
you went something mainstream.
Yeah, mainstream, and then
listen,
I see what you did. You gave him the left jab before you hit him with the uppercut, right? With the I want to talk about werewolves.
Sure, more like a big bite of. Gave him a big bite of something like that. But anyway, so it's still it's still going, and the thing is that it's expanded. These things were always there, but my knowledge has expanded because I started realizing that where there were things that related to the so-called werewolf, which I've always said from the beginning, I still say today, I don't believe we're talking about anything like the traditional classic werewolf, where like in France, they had the Beast of Gévaudan, which was actually killing and eating people. To my knowledge, this creature has not done that. There's one incident in Kentucky that's talked about quite a lot, but it's still up in the air what it is. And if that were true, I mean, you would be getting killings all over the country and the world. It would be very hard to put a lid
well,
on
if you talk to David Pilates in Missing 411, he might say, well,
something's making people disappear.
So
Yeah.
Linda, and I'm not trying to jump ahead because there's a lot of stuff in between, but I just did this podcast, obviously with Wes. We just talked about Sasquatch Chronicles, and really the debate that I see today, the debate is not, does these things exist? Because there's been thousands of eyewitnesses, including myself. The debate, I don't think, centers on, does Dogman exist? The debate centers on, what is Dogman? Is this a biological creature, or is this something paranormal or supernatural? And I think you started to get into a little bit of that because you talked about you were doing some research at a library, and you think you know why all these sightings were happening on this little stretch of road called Bray Road in Wisconsin. So I think we're really excited today to get your take on this, as far as, is this a biological creature, or is this something that's supernatural that Native Americans have talked about for thousands of years?
And before you answer that, the one thing that I would like to throw out there, and this may tie into that, is, so as you have done, written these books and done these investigations throughout the years, so you have a cluster of sightings there around Bray Road. Do you find that there are clusters of sightings? When there's a sighting, do you find that there is multiple sightings from an area? Do you find that, or have you found that over the years, so that maybe whatever you have found in the Bray Road area can also be an answer as to why there's other clusters of sightings? If that's the case, maybe that's not.
Well, yeah, different areas do have flare-ups at different times. For instance, I've found a number of upright wolf sightings, large upright wolf sightings, in some of the northern European countries, France and Germany in particular, and many of them cluster around military sites. Some left over from World War II, or even some that go back to medieval times. Good military sites tend to stay on, because they require certain things. They require, usually they want high land so they can see around them, what's happening, and protect it better. Sometimes there are interesting electromagnetic features in the area, or usually something special. And so I've written about these on their own, but they do range all over the U.S. But still, here's this little 3 to 4 mile long road of farms, and we're having people to this day seeing weird things. And there's a place that on the northeastern end of Bray Road that seems to have more activity than any place else. And I received a call about 5 or 6 years ago from a man named Lee Hampel, who happened to have purchased a big part of that land. He had 40 acres. He was a retired math teacher from Chicago. He had horses, and he wanted to grow food for his horses right there. And he kept finding mutilated animals on the property. And he started asking some of his neighbors, and they're going, "Oh yeah, that's the werewolf. Just go talk to Linda Godfrey." And imagine, coming from Chicago, and they say, "Yeah, that's the werewolf." Like that,
Like this guy bought land on Bray Road and had no idea that there. Well, that's his own fault. I mean,
yes,
that's his own fault. Did he wonder why he got it for like $25 an acre?
Yeah, he's, and it's a really interesting piece of land too. But again, no big deep forest or anything. Part of it butts up against another field, which butts up against some forested lands. So there's sort of a cushion between him, where he has his barn, and actual Bray Road. And
if you, not to cut you off, but if you Google Earth Bray Road and you Google Earth Temple Road, where I had my experience, they're incredibly similar. Incredibly similar.
Yeah.
Oh,
yep.
Well, this is, I've shown this at conferences that I've talked to, and people get really excited when they see it, because I had found this little book in the Elkhorn Library that I hadn't seen anywhere a few years ago, and it was old Indian trails of Walworth County. And I realized, because there's just like nothing to differentiate the road from any other place until I read this. And it turns out that it was the site of large maple groves, and that it was known for maple syrup, which would have been a sacred place in early Native American times, because maple syrup, they didn't have regular sugar. This was something that could make food taste good and preserve food, and was considered, a big boon to the tribe to have this. And so I started looking at the trails, and I realized that this end of Bray Road, right where Lee Hampel has his 40 acres, happens to be the center of a geological prayer wheel. Some people call it. It has different names, but you'll see this in various native lands and things that they create all over the United States. It's not just particular to one tribe, but this tip of Bray Road happened to be the center of, if you took a piece of paper and drew north-south lines, and then drew straight east-west lines, and then off to the angles, each one, the center of it would be Lee Hampel's farm, and then the other ones each lead out to a cluster of freshwater lakes, which are also sacred, and were the site in many of these towns of the ancient effigy mounds. And they're animal-shaped effigy mounds. And when the settlers first arrived, this whole area of southern Wisconsin, especially southeastern Wisconsin, was covered with them. And the grounds around them were manicured like a state park, only probably more in order that our state parks are now let to run pretty wild. These were manicured and almost like terraformed was what it looked like when these started. And Bray Road was the very center of this. And I followed each one of these components out to where it ended in little lakes. And there was one for each, and they were all filled with these ancient animal effigy figures, which are not small things. Some of them have ranged up to 150 feet wide, and what they are is raised. They're usually raised 3 to 6 feet above the ground level, and they're very stylized depictions. And people say, "Oh, they're just crude drawings." No, they're not crude. They're very stylized, which meant there were certain codes for knowing how to depict each animal, so they would know what it was. And they would arrange them with the landscape. So if they were doing bears, there'd be a line of bears going down to the water. If they were doing thunderbirds, the thunderbirds would be farther up above the other animals. And this fits into the Ho-Chunk. That's one of the local tribes. Their most ancient lore that they have and beliefs relate to these, to their own tribal totem figures. So this is kind of mind-bending. I'm still trying to get a really good geological depiction of it so people can see it. But the interesting thing was that the Ho-Chunk's belief and the belief of just about any Native American elder that I've been able to track down and talk to, I have some friends who are also in this position to know, and they all say that they believe their ancestors, and still to this day, believe that these creatures like Bigfoot and the upright wolf and the thunderbird are multi-dimensional, and that they come originally from what they would call the spirit world. They emerge into our world through these freshwater springs that abide in all of these creatures on this big pie-shaped kind of imaginary, because there's no big line. You have to kind of look at the map and then look at where you are to decide where these would have been. But although I actually have drawn a map myself, but it's still interesting. It all works together. There's the lore. There's the freshwater springs. There is the geological formation. That again, it's not drawn by a line, but you have to look and see where each of these communities are situated, and it's almost the perfect geological medicine wheel.
So I think what you're coming. So to answer my question, I think what you're telling the listeners out there is you're leaning towards these are supernatural, multidimensional creatures.
They're flesh and blood. But they have the ability to.
Right, exactly. They're flesh and blood when they're here. They come here for reasons perhaps like procreation. When they're here, they can eat. They need to eat in order to have energy to go places. They can procreate. They can do what they want. But when they want to go back, they go back through these freshwater springs and come back and forth between the spirit world and ours as they like. And so when you ask the question, are they flesh and blood? Are they something in between? Are they spirit creatures? The answer is yes.
All the above.
They're all those things.
That was always my favorite on standardized tests. All of the above.
All the above. So, Linda, the numerous sightings, and I understand what you're saying about Bray Road being the perfect location for given the mounds and stuff. But how does that explain the thousands of sightings all over? And in Ohio, we've had multiple sightings. In one of your books, Real Wolfmen, if anybody has the book, it's fantastic. On page 113, don't ask me how I have that memorized, but on page 113, you talk about 2 people seen Dogmen in Mansfield, Ohio, which, by the way, is 20 miles.
That's
from
where Jason drove from today,
Right.
by the way.
So,
In the fog.
Yes.
With so it's a good thing you didn't know about this story before.
so Mansfield, Ohio is just 20 miles away from where we're located, and probably 30 miles from Temple Road, where I had my experience. For the life of me, I don't think we have anything like that. Although Ohio is known for like
Oh yeah,
Great
Ohio
Serpent
is
Mound.
definitely native. I mean,
yeah.
Yeah, the mound building
Yeah, and
Indians
so-
are in Ohio.
Yeah, and I don't know exactly, where the boundaries of this might be, where there aren't anymore. I think you can find different sorts of entry points at different places. And interestingly enough, there are other types of unknown upright creatures that I don't think are the same thing, and other people too. For instance, everybody interested in this show perhaps has seen the Skinwalker Ranch series. And
oh yeah,
it has been
yes.
written about a long time before. Very often I will get reports of people who are driving in or near a reservation, and they will see something that looks like an upright wolf, except it's much more human. It's got actual shoulders, and it may have parts of clothing on it, which normally you don't see. It usually has red eyes instead of the normal canine yellow-green eye shine, and so it's just different, bigger, and they're supposed to be related to medicine men who've turned down a different path than the normal medicine men too. So there's that one. Then there are also creatures that are supposed to be the medicine men who've turned down a normal healing path, and this gets into a whole other thing. It segues. They are said to travel in orbs, in perfect spheres of light, and some are white, some are orange, seem to be the main colors. Sometimes you see other ones, but mainly they're white or orange, often described as the size of a basketball. And I saw one, along with Lee Hampel on his farm, and a colleague who was an interior designer from Chicago, Sanjay Singhal. We were doing a stakeout. I had asked Sanjay to join us, and the thing was, what Lee Hampel had been doing was bringing back carcasses from Illinois, road-killed deer, that he would bring. And at the time, this was.
Now this just sounds like the start of a real horror movie. Like you got this guy from the city bringing back carcasses. And by the way, if you invited me to a stakeout and there wasn't really any steak, I'd be very disappointed. Just to let you know.
As an aside, I think it's illegal to take deer carcasses across straight lines, by the way.
It is now, but the thing was, he could legally a carcass from Illinois in his own truck to his own farm in Wisconsin.
Oh, because it was
when
for
he
farm use or something, maybe? Like you could do...
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so he could do that, and he had DNR people out to his farm and stuff just to make sure. But then a couple of years ago, he had to quit because there was a resurgence of the brain disease, the deer brain disease, and so they clamped.
Is that wasting or
real
something? Is
tightly.
that what it's called?
This was just before that happened. So he had this one. It was 180-pound deer. It was this massive thing, and nothing was touched. He had it laid out area where he almost had like a pivot point where these things would attack whatever was laid, or when I say these things, because I really don't know what we're talking about, but whatever was laid out back there would be torn apart or partly devoured, or one was dragged out into the center of the field and its neck snapped off, and twisted. You could see the twist mark on it. And he was told by a butcher that anybody to do that, any human would have needed a huge chopping block and butchery tools, to make its neck like that. So anyway, it was a very, very eerie place to be. and nothing was touching this one that he had put out. And it wasn't good enough for humans, but usually you'll find some animal on the totem pole will start munching on these things. And he was really documenting it well too. He has like several thousand photos taken from 3 to 4 different trail cams that he had out there trying to take the photos of them. And in every case, he set it up so that there were trail cams on the creature, and then, or the deer, I should say. And then during the time that something was taken, and the next picture, there would either be like a big blast of steamy air that formed a mist, and you couldn't see what was going on. And then in the next one, the carcass was gone, basically. It gets really complicated, so I won't go into all that. But he had this big buck lying out in the usual takeaway point, and I thought it was just so strange. I said, Lee, why don't we just have this stakeout and sit and see if something even bigger is scaring away, whatever should be taking the bait here. And so we were sitting across the field from that point, and there was some shrubbery nearby, but nothing much else. We were just sitting there kind of shooting the breeze. I was in the back seat with my camera. I like to be in the back so I can see what's sneaking up. And the two guys who were big guys, they were both like 6'2" or so, were sitting in the front. So they blocked my view a little bit, but I was watching these lights come along a normal flight path, and one was striking me as making slightly erratic movements. And when I thought that, it stopped and backed up. And it looked like airplane landing lights at the size they should be from where we were looking. But when it backed up, when it was hanging there in the air, I said, hey, guys, I don't think this is an airplane. And they looked. And when the three of us looked, it was as if it knew we were looking at it. It began to come across the field toward us. And we saw there was no airplane. There was nothing for it to be a landing light, too. But the light was consistent. And we were just, jaws dropped. I was fumbling with my camera to try and get it. And it moved within a matter of seconds, really, to right next to the car. And it was maybe 25 feet in the air and about the same from the car. And it was the size of a basketball. It was a silvery white sphere, a perfect, like it had been machined or something. And it was lit from within, but it didn't really light up the area. It cast like a beam down at one point, but it was just shocking because there was nothing to explain it. And I have read many places since then that shaman or medicine men would often travel inside this type of orb. I actually was close to one too. I had another sighting previously some years ago in Michigan in a haunted house, and it looked exactly like what we were seeing. But the three of us all agreed exactly on what we saw. It was amazing.
Well, and I hate to give Sasquatch Chronicles so much publicity because they really need it, but I listen to Wes I listen to that quite a bit, and that's the one thing he has been finding with the Bigfoot sightings is that he always asks about, have you seen orbs of light? And almost everybody sees orbs of light in conjunction with Bigfoot sightings, which would certainly tie into your theory of if these things are coming from another dimension or another plane of existence, and that's how they traveled is by and you're talking about Bigfoot and the Thunderbirds and Dogman and whatever other kind of cryptids out there, and that's their mode of travel. It goes hand in hand with what you're saying, obviously. And we know David Hensley from the Paranormal Road. They were out doing they were doing like a ghost hunt outside or a ghost investigation, and he described the same thing to us, that he saw this orb of light that was obviously intelligent because it was dodging trees and moving, intelligently in his estimation. And up there where they were looking, there's also quite a few Bigfoot sightings in the woods. And so it makes you wonder if those things are, they're coming, from that other world, and they're like, ooh, wait a second, I can't show up here.
So one thing about that is, you talk about dimensional planes. The thing that I saw on Temple Road, the first thing that I thought of description-wise, it looked like the Egyptian god Anubis. That's how I described it. And
I have had make that description. You're not the only one.
And the thing about it is, Anubis was the god, to the Egyptians, was the god of the underworld. So he would be a god of a different dimensional plane. But talking to Wes on Sasquatch Chronicles, he was telling me that, the Egyptians sort of stole that concept from the Sumerians. And the Sumerians had this, I'm not going to say folklore, I guess. I don't know how to describe it. But they were experiencing belief long before the Egyptians. So if you're talking about, ancient Mesopotamian, the Sumerians, that's the cradle of civilization, is where, life sprang up. I mean, these things have been around for thousands upon thousands of years, traveling from one dimension to the other, and then get incorporated into organized religion with the Egyptians. So it makes sense.
They're all over the globe. And, here's the thing. We felt it was acting intelligently with us, too, because Sanjay, for some reason, felt he needed to shine a big mag light at this thing. And, we don't know why. He said he just felt the urge to. And he did. He's shown it out, because he was driving. He's shown it out of his driver's side window. And the thing, we all had the feeling that it was surprised. It was like just this sense of, it was shocked, although it had no features or anything like that in it. And when he, within a second after he did that, it just sort of closed in around itself and was gone. And he thought maybe it went behind this bunch of brushy plants, and he just jumped out of the car to do that. I wasn't going out of that car, and neither was Lee. But he came back within seconds, and he had just this kind of drained expression on his face. And he said, "I'm terribly sick. I'm sorry, but we have to leave right now." And he didn't see anything in particular, but he just got this complete ill, we could tell by his face. It was just ashen that we had to leave. I don't know what would have happened if he hadn't done that, if we would have been beamed up, or who knows, we all would have been. But because he went around there and did that, and he had driven, we did leave then. So, but there are also other claims about these spheres. Many tribes believe that little people travel in them, that Bigfoot travels in them. They're kind of a transport, just universal transport, from what I make out of looking up all these.
If you look at if you go back to Iceland and you look at the folklore involving the Fae, that's the same thing, right? Is that they transfer, and that's the whole Midsummer's Night's Eve thing, is that on Midsummer's Night's Eve, the veil between our world and this supernatural world is at its thinnest because of the summer equinox or whatever, and that's when you can see orbs more clearly and stuff like that.
I'm just going to tell you, if Elon Musk gets a hold of this podcast, he's going to try to figure out a way to capitalize on that as a mode of transportation. Which I don't. So then.
They're kind of like universal cars.
So then I guess then your theory on what these beings are and where they come from probably then might explain why Bigfoot and Dogman, despite all the experiences and sightings and encounters, don't really seem to be intent on hurting or killing a human being. If they're, it seems like maybe they're more or less trying to scare people out of certain areas to keep them away from them. But it doesn't seem like they really want to do us harm as much as they just want to instill a little bit of respect and fear in us for their being.
That's certainly how it seems, and I always say I can't claim that, yes, this is what they are, all of them for sure. I think we are looking at several somewhat different phenomena when you see the types that look like the skinwalkers, or you see the I call them the normal forest type, that people run into them in the woods, or, just there are several others too. But, I like to say that this theory best fits what I've heard from Native American friends across the country and other places in the world too. I mean, it's simply a worldwide phenomena, and why would that be if there wasn't some validity to it? And it does sometimes make people sick. In fact, all of these things do, and I don't necessarily recommend that everybody run off to the woods and look for them, because it may be a bad thing for you, and my health has not been great since I started actually encountering them, and it, by the way, it took me almost 20 years to have what I would call a bona fide sighting. So it's not something that people should. Pardon?
I mean, did you really want to have an encounter and a sighting, or were you just fine with hearing other people's encounters and sightings, especially after you've had yours? Because the judge has said forever, careful what you wish for. When people say, "Well, I'd love to see one." Well, so how do you feel like now that you've had those experiences? Is it something you're glad that you had, or you're kind of like, maybe I wish I didn't have?
Well, you just never know, because it works out differently for different people. Some people go through life and they're healthy and it doesn't seem to bother them, but an amazing amount of people who seem to get real close and are always putting themselves out there do end up with various things. For instance, I had cancer back about 14 years ago, and when I came down with it, I was overdue for an exam, and I had just been out spending a weekend in La Crosse, Wisconsin, going out on back roads with the people who saw the Mothman, or I call it the La Crosse man bat. It's on the western side of Wisconsin, and we were out late at night we had some strange things happen, while we were following the trail of it. And when I got home, I made my appointment, went to the doctor, found out I had cancer, and he said, well, this is a really fast-growing thing. He's a couple of weeks ago, and he got it down to the time where I was in La Crosse. A couple of weeks ago, this wasn't even here. And moreover, it was hiding behind, almost intelligently, it was hiding behind a tumor that was benign, so it was almost missed at first. So I don't know if, how can you possibly say for sure that's what caused it? But then I've had other things too over the years, and it makes me wonder. And you look at other people, Rob Riggs from Texas, who was best known for talking about the Marfalites in Texas. He had all of these same experiences, right down to the spheres, and he passed away much too young from cancer. And you can go on and find, of course, a certain number of people in any given population are going to come down with terminal diseases, but it just seems that within this one really rather small group of
a disproportionate. Yeah, so I think what you're saying is that the theory is these orbs, these phenomena, are basically emitting some sort of radiation that would be similar to if I got too close to a piece of uranium.
Well, how would you realistically, how would you travel from one dimension to the other anyway? You'd have to have. I mean, it's not like there's just a door. I mean, there might be a doorway that leads to, but you'd have to have some real source of energy to do that. And to go back, would you draw are you drawing energy or somebody's life force from them to propel you to, be able to become a real form in this dimension, and then need some more energy to, get back to where you came from? I mean,
well, if you're talking about shaman who are able to change or metamorphose.
Well, I don't think we're talking about.
Right.
We're talking about their pets. That's what I think we're talking about.
But if you're talking about being able to travel through an orb of light, you'd have to change your body, your molecular structure, to get inside an orb. The amount, the immense energy that it would take to do that, I think.
Right. It doesn't sound likely, but it's probably also why the people who practice this, the shamans and the medicine men and the skinwalkers, they undergo some sort of intense training that one can only surmise that can reduce them or change their molecular or radioactive. That's the wrong term. Their electromagnetic, structure in order to do these. That's why they can't just go to one meeting of Skinwalker camp and do this. To my knowledge, they have to go. It's a thing that happens over many years. There are good spins and bad spins on these things, and thing that is kept mysterious and at bay for the great number of people in human population. Because can you imagine if everybody could do this? It would be pretty chaotic.
That was going to lead me to the title of your 19th book, Interdimensional Travel for Dummies. Imagine the promotion you could do for that. It'd make this Dogman stuff look like chicken feed if you could, get a handle on that.
Well, here's a thought here.
Well, and
the orbs themselves, they could be interdimensional. To us, they could look like, from our dimension, they could be small, round orbs about the size of a basketball. But within that orb itself, it could be any size. That could be a direct gateway into another dimension. There's that to consider as well.
That sounds like the whole theory of, what if our planet is just a speck on a giant's thumb or something?
Right. So, I get what Jason's saying is what may appear to us to be
a small ball of light.
A small ball of light is actually inside that due to
our perception, maybe.
Yeah, it's actually much larger inside there.
Yes, absolutely. Much larger inside than what we can see on the outside. It's like the whole inside could be a whole nother dimension.
What's the theory? And somebody help me on this. The closer you get to traveling at the speed of light, the smaller the mass gets.
Well, that I believe was Einstein's theory.
Right.
I think
it is.
Or some.
Well, yeah. The faster you go, the smaller
Linda, book number 20
gets.
is Physics for Dummies. Where this is what we're broaching. We need that. We need to have that handy here so we can. or maybe we'll write it Physics by a bunch of dummies.
Physics, quantum temporal mechanics by a bunch of dummies.
Well, and this gets brought up all the time on our podcast when we talk about ghosts and different things like that. Is first rule of thermodynamics. Right. Einstein is energy is neither created nor destroyed. It just takes different forms. And
right.
And what does that energy do?
There's also the question of how it interacts with our human waves, whatever it is that we have. Because I can tell you real quickly, my other incident is told about in Weird, Wisconsin, Weird, Michigan. Because I was in Michigan, driving around somewhere in the northern part, and this would have been about 2005. That my usual method was to blow into a town and find out where the local historian lived. And I was in this little town on the shore of Lake Michigan, and somebody said to me, well, or actually it was the local historian that sent me to an old brick tavern that was now being used for an apartment and law offices. And the lady who owned the building had no idea that I was coming, who I was, what I wanted. So there's nothing she could have set up. And I got her to take me down to the basement, because normally for that book, I just needed to get photographs of the surroundings, because you couldn't really expect ghosts to show up on cue or anything. So I'm like, well, we'll go down to the basement. I'll take my shots of what we've got down there. And we walked down, and it was a huge, huge basement with absolutely nothing in it. And all of the ductwork had been taped over with brown paper, so it was very plain. There was one little light bulb at the far end and one next to the steps where we were. And we decided to turn off the lights for a few minutes. And we were just standing there in the dark, and then all of a sudden, this white form, and this was only a 7-foot ceiling, and it was maybe about 6 or 7 feet away from me, with this ceiling right there, and this whitish basketball-sized orb just appeared right in front of me. I had the unique impression that it was very interested in me for some reason. And I thought, no, this can't be. And I turned my head away and looked back, because I was thinking it was just a optical delusion. And it was still there, just like it had been. And I had my camera around my neck. I didn't have a cell phone. I had an actual camera with me at that time. And I raised it up, and that's all the time it took for it to just kind of boink out of existence. It was gone. And I asked and I could hear the owner kind of take a sharp breath. We hadn't said anything or spoken during this time. And she turned the light back on, and I said, did you see that? And she said, yes. But what she saw was the full form of the ghost that was known for being in that basement. They called him Little Billy. He was a teenage boy that died of tuberculosis in the early 1900s, and was known through town that way because he was seen as this young man. She saw Basement Billy, as he was known, and I saw just the pure form of the orb at the same time, in the same place. And I think it's because she had an expectation of what this thing should look like, and I didn't. I was just like, oh, it's going to take a couple minutes, and then I'll turn the light back on and go to the next place. So that suggests to me that these things have the ability to interact with our minds or with our electromagnetic fields or whatever, and it's almost like they're using our brains as a computer image, perhaps, or something. But whatever you're building as an expectation in your mind is going to look up. Maybe, I don't want to say boomerang back on you, but that's what you'll see, evidently. So
that is a great example of,
that's fascinating.
Yeah, of two people seeing the same thing. And it's not like she said, "Oh, I didn't see anything," but she saw the same thing.
Right.
She saw something at the same time you did. Her perception was a ghost or boy. Your perception was a ball of light, because you had no expectation.
You had no frame of reference.
Yeah, you didn't know that there was a ghost.
Right.
Well, maybe you did. So what was the impetus to go to this building anyway and take the picture for the book? I mean, what was the story that you were kind of researching and going to put in the book?
It was known to have poltergeist activity,
Okay.
and it was thought there were weird things. I mean, she used to run an antique store in there, and she'd come in the morning into the still locked room, and all the glassware would have been swiped off to the counter to the floor, things like that. And so it had gotten kind of a reputation, and a few people were seeing this mysterious disappearing figure that looked like a teenage boy, dressed in the antique clothing. And so it was talked about that way, but I didn't know that. I just thought it was like a poltergeist because she was telling me about the silverware and glassware that was found and breaking. It would break light bulbs, and I was just thinking of sort of a protozoan type energy that wasn't really rigidly known, So I didn't expect that I was going to see a full-shaped young man, and I didn't. I saw the pure energy, the globe of energy.
Well, I think what you need to do then is you need to go back and sit in that basement until you see another.
I never wanted anything so out of that basement.
I mean, it would just be interesting to see if you would see Basement Billy, or what or whatever he was called. I mean, now that is your expectation.
Yeah, that was in Manistee, Michigan. And if anybody has the Weird Michigan book, then you can kind of see the picture of the lady and what it looks like and everything. But it was really creepy in there. I didn't like it at all. I just wanted to get out of there.
That sounds like a perfect job for one of our loyal listeners up there, Tim Lovelace. He would be just the kind of guy we could send to go sit in the basement, and he would love that because he's kind of a creepy guy himself. But and I only say that because I know Tim will listen to this and he'll be like, "Oh, thanks a lot," But you got to take care of.
So,
our
what
listeners.
Expectation would the ghost have of seeing Tim?
Ooh, I don't know. I could probably say that,
when you put it on a scale of creepiness. Jason
would have to cut that out of the episode. I would, if I said that out loud, of what the expectation. So Linda, you've written all these, 18 books, amassed. I mean, I can't even imagine the research that has gone into these books. The follow-up, the
field research,
the talk. Yeah, what really stands out to you as one of the scariest, best, creepiest Dogman stories that you have come across? That you just, other than the judges, because I know you listen to the judges' story. But what is one of the best stories that you've heard? Word for word.
Wow, that's really a tough one because there've been so many, and some of them are just simple, but I think really frightening. There was a man and I think it would have to be the only one I know of that was actually hurt by one of these things. And this was a man in Quebec, and he was out just walking on a trail one day, and he was not armed or anything like that. And the next thing he knows, he's walking up a trail, and this big animal is there, and it turns around, and it's an upright wolf-like creature, and it was at least 6 feet tall, just like they're always explained. And he was just like in panic mode. And he said he wanted to get around it and get away from it, and each time he'd make a move, it would sort of counter it. It was like, he said he felt it was not being vicious, but more like when you run up with your shopping cart in a grocery store and you don't know which way to go, you're putting it this way and that way.
Yes.
And finally, it dove past him, and he sort of went slightly the wrong way at the same time. And it ended up skinning its fangs along his flank, his side, and actually caused like a big wound as it went. And he had to go to the hospital and get stitches, and told them it was a bear because he knew they'd never believe him. But he said he always felt it didn't mean to do that. It's just that he had sort of cornered it, and that's the way it went out. And then he made it kind of. And he sent me a photograph of the stitched up area, and you can't prove it from something like that, but I've shown it to friends who are a doctor or a surgeon, and they said it looks like very consistent with something like a long tooth from a carnivore of some type. So, and he said that's exactly what it was. It was a wolf on its hind legs. And that to me is really scary because it shows that they do exist in a solid enough form that they could do danger if they wanted to. It's the implications as much as anything else.
Well, yeah, I mean, because there's not, let's be honest, there's nothing you could do if a creature that size with fangs, claws, and traveling interdimensional or whatever, even if it wasn't in a spirit creature, that kind of creature you'd stand no chance against.
Well,
if
think
really
of it this
wanted
way.
to
I mean, if you
do
get
something.
attacked by an 80-pound pit bull,
Yeah.
you stand no chance.
Listen,
I mean,
I'm on the
200-pound.
I'm on the mail route every day, and it doesn't take. A 40-pound dog is on you and got a hold of your leg before you can, do anything about it, and I'm just like that. So I can't imagine. I've seen some dogs that are 100 pounds.
Joe Rogan's podcast, he talked about, would you fight a 30-pound rat? Not that they exist, but would you fight? No, because 30-pound rat would probably kill you.
A 30-pound rat absolutely does exist in the bowels of New York City. Come on.
So yeah, I mean, the thing that my experience and the thing that I saw that night, 6 foot tall, canine. There's no way I could have fought that off. I mean, there's just no way I could have fought that off. I mean, I don't care.
People will say, yeah, I thought it wanted to have me for lunch, and it could have if it wanted to, badly enough, But that's the other baffling thing, is that in almost every occasion, the creature people will have the impression that it could get them if it wanted to. It's not happy that they're there, but then at some point that it will just break off and dive into the shrubbery and they don't see it again, So it's almost as if it's bluff charging, and it sounds to me very territorial in nature, and maybe that's a lot of what's behind it. It wants its own territory, and that's often, people feel that's the case with Bigfoot too. So,
well, as within any society, let's just say, we'll call it the Bigfoot circles and the Dogman. There's always some rogue characters. So for there's probably some Dogmen, some Bigfoot, some other cryptids who maybe are having a bad day, or they just don't like the way things are run, and they're going to be the ones that are maybe snatching people from national parks, or there's always going to be some bad actors.
Well, I mean, if this Dogman creature would have gotten me that night, I would have disappeared, and no one would have said, "Well,
we'd
I
never
think
know.
he was taken by a Dogman." I mean, that's a statistic that wouldn't have shown up.
No.
Especially because my experience predates the Bray Road incident. I mean, no one would think, oh well, and there's no large carnivores. There's no apex predators in my area of the state. People just thought, well, somehow he got abducted by somebody,
Or he got hit by a semi or
Yeah, or
something,
something.
and whatever.
Yeah, they got killed.
Yeah. But
So I'm not going to rule out that these things wouldn't kill you.
yeah, because who's going to be the one to tell?
Yeah, hey, listen, I got killed by a Dogman or a
I don't
Sasquatch.
know. Unless there was some serious evidence or whatever.
Right.
right.
So, off the topic of Dogmen, you mentioned to us before we went on the air that you had some little people stories.
Yeah, and I have actual sightings of elves and things like that that are in I Know What I Saw, the latest book that came out, but also in relationship to these little to the things that seem to travel in orbs. And this may be a good segue to end my talk for today. But my husband and I had a trip the week before last up to Superior, and I had a couple of things I wanted to do up there. It was our anniversary, was the main reason we went. But way back in 2005 or so, I met a man who was gathering from land that he owned on the south shore of Lake Superior that contained concretions, which are a special type of formation that it's almost like the same idea as putting an irritant in an oyster to make it grow a pearl. These are small, round rocks. They look like they're almost machined. And inside of each one is some sort of thing, a fossil-like thing, like a fossilized leaf or whatever, that sand and pressure over many, many years have made into these little weird-looking balls. Some are like an inch, some are several inches across. And that, too, is in the Weird Wisconsin book, for good reference. And there was a man up there who had found about 50,000 of them along the lakeshore. And these particular ones are only found there. The only trouble was that the Bad River Band of I want to get this correct here. The Lake Superior Bad River Band of Chippewa or Ojibwe. And they believe that these concretions were specially created by God, each with a tiny soul, and they've made it illegal now to take these from their land. And they kind of would like it if people brought them back, although 50,000 I doubt they're going to get. But I had one that I had saved from... Yeah.
So that's quite a haul right there.
It is. But I decided, well, I'm not doing anything with it. They would like it back. Why don't I just take it back? And so you can't just go out in Lake Superior and throw it if you want them to know about it. We went and found their tribal offices, got escorts down to the correct shore, and I threw it out as far as I could into the lake, which was, if you saw Tony Fauci's toss of the baseball this spring, I was worth seeing it. So it didn't go very far, but they said that was fine, and in fact they had said just take it down to the shore and chuck it in the lake. So I chucked it in the lake, and I just couldn't help feeling that there was something unique about it, and I didn't do it because I was afraid of it or because I believed in it or because for any other reason other than that. I knew they would like it back, and I thought that's something I can give someone. But it was weird because when it landed, it was like the sand right there on that beach sort of sucked it down, partially down into it, almost like watching somebody go into quicksand. And it was just kind of a unique thing, but it got me to thinking about, we're talking about spirit-like globes that maybe carry spiritized people or other things, and here is the very concrete, no pun intended, version of that same thing. It's like we have certain forms that are solid or spirit-like that mimic one another, and we don't know which one is first or whatever. I think there's just so much work to be done on this, but I felt kind of good that I put it back there, and I don't know. And I'm not trying to urge people for feeling guilty if they have one, because the man who was collecting them had a place called the Concretion Museum, and was selling them from there. But if people wanted to, there is a way to give them back, and I'm not going to give out any information on that. It's easy enough to find if you just Google the Bad River Band. It tells where they are and everything. But so I just thought it was another link in the presentation of globes of light, globes of mysterious substance, and globes of earthly substance that all have this idea of something special riding in it or residing in it. And to me, that's just it's another direction to go in the eternal quest.
Yeah, that's a very interesting. I mean, I can't believe 50,000. One guy found 50,000 of those little. I mean, how does that stuff even come into existence? That's just amazing.
So, yeah. So just something to kind of blow everybody's mind with if you think about it, it just gets really interesting. And they're supposed to be like a couple thousand years old, more than that probably. I can't remember the exact amount, but yeah, it's an interesting thing. So
Indeed.
So Linda, before we let you go today, what is there anything else that you would like to steer our listeners? How they can come check your stuff out, keep up to date with what you're doing. Sure. Any new things that you're working on that you want to kind of tease the listeners?
Sure. Yeah. I've been working on the Black Mystery Cats thing, and in fact, I mentioned a little bit about that earlier, I think. And my son, who is a very skilled filmmaker, and I and his father and our informant in Hillsboro, Wisconsin, about these mystery cats, created a documentary. It won first place documentary in the Midwestern area of the Midwest Weird Fest, and it's now available on Prime Video. The name of it is Return to Wildcat Mountain, and it tells a lot of the Native American view of these sorts of things, along with the question of why officials won't admit that these types of creatures are there. They don't want anything to do with it in most cases. We had wonderful witnesses. There were, I think there's a total of over 100 witnesses that have given their names, and I put an extra appendix in the back of the book. This information is also in 2 chapters in the I Know What I Saw book, and you can find it all at lindagodfrey.com. And of course, again, just for the film, you can just go to Prime Video and do a search for Return to Wildcat Mountain, and you'll pop that up.
So we urge our listeners, I mean, if you're listening to this and you did not know who Linda Godfrey was, shame on you. You're not a true cryptid fan, because, like we said, she is the godmother of the Dogman and many other. Her books run a nice little gamut of different subjects, and to know that we can go and watch on Prime that documentary. I mean, I think we're all going to go check that out.
Oh yes.
I mean, that sounds great. But we truly appreciate your approach and all the research that you have done, because I think you've kind of blown our minds.
Oh
this
yeah,
morning.
I wasn't expecting this today. I got to be honest with you.
With your take and your on what you think some of this stuff is. I mean, I don't know how we can argue with you, because you've done the research. You've done the research, right. Been out there experiencing some of this stuff, and hopefully you don't run into the Dogman in its Dogman form, and
not something you really want.
Yeah, because that would be a terrible last chapter to the book. Linda.
Well, I may have done that one time. If you read the opening chapter in Michigan Dogman book.
Okay. All right.
I gotta look that up now.
So for our listeners out there, if you want a good read, something that you can, and I do this all the time with Linda's books, because I have several of them. I like to sit in bed at night and read about 5 to 10 pages. There's different stories. It breaks it down. It's a perfect nighttime read. And the stories are amazing. And my favorite book so far is Real Wolfmen, True Encounters in Modern America. I know it's an older piece in her catalog, but if you really want to learn more about Dogman, pick up that book. Linda, where can they pick that up? Just at your website?
Actually, it's probably better to, just look for it online in Amazon or any online bookstores should probably have it.
Yeah, Amazon or Barnes and Nobles. Excuse me. Yeah.
Barnes and Noble, yeah, definitely. Or go to the Penguin Random House pages and look up my books there. So there's all kinds of places.
Okay. Well, Linda,
And Prime Video. I was just going to say it's Prime Video for Return to Wildcat Mountain.
yes. We'll make sure when we post about this episode that we make sure put a link up to that so people can go check that out, because I think people are going to, after they hear this episode, are going to want to.
I'm going to go check it out.
Yeah.
Yep, me too.
Yeah.
Labor Day weekend, I'm checking it out.
Oh yeah, Labor Day. We might as well labor. Right?
So Linda, I want to thank you personally for coming on. You know, Dogman is an important topic to me because of my life experience, and I've read so many of your books and followed you. I'm a little actually starstruck to be talking to you, and it's been super exciting for me.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed talking with you really very much.
Yes. Thanks a lot for joining us this morning, Linda, and we can't wait for everybody to hear this episode, because I think they're really going to enjoy all your insights. So have a beautiful day there in Wisconsin, and I hope you guys had a good anniversary last weekend.
We did. We had a very, very fun trip. So, and thanks to all your listeners. I really appreciate it that people take time to listen and think about these things.
Yes,
indeed.
All right, thanks a lot, Linda.
Thanks, Linda. Take care.
Thank you. You have a good day now.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the From the Shadows podcast. Until next time, never shy away from the darkness or what may be lurking in the shadows. We are out.